And we have a real, some people are peace activists by being in the streets. And some people are peace activists because they study it and they want to bring it to fruition and they know so much about it that, when are we taught about peace? When are we taught about peace dividends? When are we taught about the declaration we had at one point that our country signed that we would no longer be in war? So I want to welcome to the Co-Creators Convergence Up Day, Unity and Peace Convergence, Laurie Timmermann. And Laurie Timmermann has quite an extensive resume from studying and being part of the World Bank, international development, so many projects around the world. But her real passion is peace. And she is a member of worldbeyondwar.org. And she studies peace, teaches peace. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Laurie has to say tonight. So I hope that some of you can stay. And Laurie, I'm going to hand the talking stick over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's really my honor. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. And this is a culmination of two degrees in international development, international affairs, really looking at how to create well-being. But what I found when I had 4 assignments in Africa, I went into 4 war-torn countries and just a rebel band with guns, or even in the Congo with Africa's World War, that live violence, conflict would unravel development by years, if not a decade. So when I pivoted from my development career, I became involved with the group World Beyond War. I was very fortunate right there in DC. They had 2 peace conferences. Now there's been 4. All of those speakers are all available on their resources page at World Beyond War. But this cadre of peace activists, experts, scholars, they have assembled together a very comprehensive book and guide called A Global Security System, an Alternative to War. So this material can seed our activism, can really inform us to be at a cutting edge, to know how to speak about effective solutions, conflict resolution, of course, the peace culture. So what I'm going to share with you is, it's kind of like a Cliff Notes version of this manual. So I'm going to do a screen share with you. So basically, peace is in an aspirational space. It's in a vision space. So it's good to set these aims, these goals, to know what we're really striving for. When all people thrive, when all people have common security, have food, health, shelter, and well-being. So let's just go through these aims for a vision of peace. The world is safe for all children. There's good education for all of them. There isn't any carbon burning industry, or global warming will have been stopped. Children will study peace and trained in powerful, peaceful methods of confronting violence. So here I do want to step in and say, a number of universities, George Mason University, have peace and conflict resolution departments, and those have been spread among the universities as well. So instead of having a Department of Defense and multiple, Army, Navy, we will have a peace force that is trained in civil-based defense. So these children will realize we are all citizens of one small planet. We are all global citizens. We are all planetary citizens. And so these children will naturally not want to become soldiers. Okay. So here we see images of what war creates. It's a bomb crater. Well, Hannah Arendt said, the reason warfare is with us is the simple fact that a substitute, a security system, an alternative for the way that nations throughout history, and we can only think of all the wars of Europe over hundreds of years, this is considered a final arbiter in international affairs. So one of the things that World Beyond War, and especially its founder, David Swanson, has articulated is the myths of war, and these myths, allow it to perpetuate. That war is inevitable, war is human nature, it's necessary, it's beneficial, the world out there is a dangerous place, it's a win-lose game, and we have enemies. So there's one of the myths that I've come to know in my studies is that wars just randomly break out. Well, I don't think they do. It's like to do a war, whether it's against Vietnam or whether it's against Iraq. There are war planners, there are warmongers, there are war cheerleaders. So, so what we need is to counter that. One of the things and one of the messages of World Beyond War, particularly, is the goal and aim to abolish war, to ban war. And so it's not to say we like this weapon, but we don't like that weapon, but we will have a war here, but we don't want one there. It's like to ban the institution of war. So to replace the war system with a different system. We know that wars don't work, and this cycle of this funding the military-industrial complex to the tune of 746 billion a year, it's actually a destabilizing force, and it creates something called permanent war, perma-war. The weapons of war, the technology of war has become ever more destructive, and we can see this in this century. In this century, we have tens of millions of people dying in the 2 world wars. So 50 to 100 million in World War II, and there's been warfare that didn't just target strategic assets of war or bases or factories. We saw blanket bombing of cities of civilians. So at a time when we should really be focusing on the main crisis in our world, which is the environmental crisis, which threatens us all, we're distracted by these othering, these nation-to-nation conflicts. And what we know is war itself is the primary user of fossil fuels, the primary polluter of greenhouse gases, and in the war making, it creates tons of toxic chemicals. So even here in the US, we feel the effects of war in these Superfund sites. So that is kind of like the state of the diagnosis. We have to have the diagnosis to know where to go from here. And a peace system is possible. Many countries don't have war, don't do war, don't have a military-industrial complex that's 50 to 60% of their budget. So we know that peace is possible. We have changed major systems in the past, and I know the folks that will be on war point to, we used to have slavery. Well, we don't have that anymore. So part of the human condition, just to be a human, is we're in family units. We operate in compassion and cooperation. And so we need to look at and study at the structures of war and peace. So we have here a photo with Gandhi. We all know that he was the founder of the nonviolence movement, which Martin Luther King also built on. Okay, so in this one little slide outlines a strategy to take on where we are now and to move the needle, to take it to the goals and aims that we set out at the beginning of the talk. Common security. That is just a simple 2 words, but what we have is, with kind of nation state egotism, nation state othering of other people in other countries, it's like, it's a little bit of saying we just want security for us at the expense of making other peoples, other nations, other regions insecure. A key phrase, demilitarizing security. If you want to know what that looks like, you have Costa Rica, a very good film on Costa Rica, and they're banning their military. It's called A Bold Peace. So third point, have a non-provocative defense posture. So you cannot claim that with the United States. If we have 50% of the world's military spending by the United States, we have advanced positioning, we have these very expensive bases, not always very welcome. I heard the last figure was 931 bases. So shift to non-provocative defense posture. And one of the things outlined in the AGSS is something called a civilian-based defense force. So we'll get to that in a little bit. A primary objective of the organization World Beyond War is closing foreign military bases. So here we have another list here of things that are part of this mix, part of this toolbox for the shift, for the progressive phasing out of militarized defense, militarization, disarmament. That is so key to have in the nuclear weapons field. I happen to have been going through international affairs studies when some of these nuclear treaties were being fashioned, SALT I, SALT II, and now a very worrying, troubling trend is going in the other direction. Under a previous administration, you had the Vice President, Al Gore, personally managing the relationship with Russia, keeping that amicable. Now there's been a kind of tilt towards going towards a second Cold War. So disarmament, very important. UN Office of Disarmament Affairs, ending the use of militarized drones. If the Security Council can ban nuclear weapons over the objections of the nuclear powers, that we as an international community in all our countries can end the use of militarized drones. And we spoke of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. The arms trade. So in the countries I was in Africa, they are not arms manufacturers. So for in Africa, there's been over 50 coups. There's been all kinds of civil conflict or cross-border conflict or conflict minerals. So those weapons, come from the, weapons traders. So ending the practice of invasions, the practice of occupations, which the US now has been a prime example of in terms of Afghanistan and Iraq. And the last point is really, it's the benefit for doing all of this. It's the economic conversion of all those resources, all that treasury tied up in what is really a dead end. It's really unproductive. And you can see that when they, mothball, vast amounts of, equipment. So economic conversion is what in a later talk in the series I'm going to call the peace dividend. With the war on terrorism, there was one documentary that had the title of A Day of Destruction, regarding the 9/11 and the trade towers, and A Decade of War. So is a decade of war a judicious or equal response to two buildings going down? So here it says, let's look at sanctions. Smart sanctions affect the elites if the elites are involved, if it's a country-sponsored terrorism. Of course, mediation, negotiation, adjudication, that worked very well with Iran. Iran gave all kinds of concessions in terms of its nuclear weapons development, and only to have an erratic US government pull back on a negotiated binding treaty. International law enforcement, there is Interpol, I understand, in Switzerland, so international cooperation law enforcement. A nonviolent resistance to any violence. And basically we have so many examples throughout history. We have not just, Gandhi in India and against the British rule. Even before that, Gandhi was opposing racism and oppression of Indian people in South Africa. We have the Poles, the Polish people with Solidarność doing nonviolent resistance. We have the Chilean people against, the dictatorship that was there. So this is kind of the way and the path to resist violence. Interposition, I'm thinking that one of the founders of Will Beyond War was David Hartzog. He had something called peace brigades. And then just to shun, to sanction, to have a global shaming of any of countries who appropriate violence for themselves against others. So one of the things is not to be caught in the very current news cycle that is just instantaneous, and this event explodes here and that event explodes there. No, there's countries, there's societies, there's long-term causes, there's long-term responses. So stop arms trade and manufacture. The rich nations, in terms of GNP, the United States was 24%, maybe it's less than that, 22% of the world's GNP. This next one is near and dear to my heart, the aid to poor nations and populations. That's where I spent my life and my career, was the little $20 billion that the US spends for international assistance to the poorest countries. That makes, and it's not just the US, of course, there's the European, has official development assistance as well. Japan, I think it's on Monday, I'm going to be giving a talk about that. Education, of course. What are the roots of terrorism? One of the roots of terrorism is this exploding population that we have. that's beyond giving people and especially young men a sense of purpose, something to a form of income. I know Kenya has a 4% population growth, and one of the former heads of the USAID specifically said, is on the board of a vocational training firm as the counter, as the antidote, as to counter, young men without anything to do that could be recruited into terrorism. Exchanges, cultural exchanges, I benefited from this myself. Let's have more of them. I was an exchange student to Brazil, and it changed the course of my life. It's just learning that people around the world are people just like us, to celebrate their differences of cultural mores, of food, of that. Anyway, one of the things of people in the United States that do have very parochial views, they also just kind of tend to see in us versus them, and we see a polarization in our own country. This next sentence I really love. This is where I lived, breathed, and this was my world, was sustainable agriculture. Was livelihood projects. So those are things that when we stop spending on unproductive war systems, then we have the funds that are, even in the US as a developed country, we're starved for funds for our own education, for our own health systems, for our own safety nets. So 4 more points here. So we have a photo here of Desmond Tutu. I had the very good fortune to meet him when I was doing a food aid project to South Africa. We gave a small amount of food to an HIV research program that he was involved with. Dismantle the military alliances. I'm going to be talking tomorrow about World War I. And World War I, it wasn't just one death of Archduke Ferdinand. There were these overlapping international military alliances that was a powder keg. And with World Beyond War, they had the 70th anniversary of NATO. NATO has bombed 6 countries. And definitely in the Balkan states and the Bosnian situation, if a people is in conflict, the last thing they need is to be bombed. So dismantle military alliances. So to have a framework, institutions, to have strategies for managing international and civil conflicts. And in that, shifting to proactive posture. So here I want to bring in the example of Rwanda. Rwanda was a powder keg. You could, if you wanted to unravel it and go back and say, well, the British favored one ethnic group to another, but you had a lot of hate speech happening on the radio, and then the whole it exploded when the president's plane crashed and went down. And so in Rwanda, it's like, what would have been a proactive position there? There's kind of, other countries, when a country is unraveling and dropping into violence, other countries don't want to go there. They don't want to be there. So what is that proactive posture? And in strengthening international institutions, and strengthening and reforming. Maybe further on, there'll be a slide about the reforms that the UN needs to have, specifically regarding the Security Council, that why do the powers of the last World War still have this veto power on the Security Council? oh, I guess that was the next slide, is all about reforming the United Nations. So yeah, these are the suggestions in the AGSS, reforming the charter to deal with aggression more effectively, to reform the Security Council, like I mentioned, looking at the composition, and revise and eliminate that veto. So the US and France and the other permanent Security Council members can veto any measure that's going to point a finger at them or that kind of thing. And just to give you an example of that, I mean, the US mined some harbor in Nicaragua when there was an administration that was against the Sandinista regime. The Sandinista regime had done a revolution against a dictator, Somoza, but the US could not be voted as having broken international law or be sanctioned because it could veto that. So we need a level playing field here. Okay, so early warning management, early warning, forecasting, managing conflicts early. So we have all the systems in the world. We have, to have a Department of Defense, to have Navy, to have 80 billion going to intelligence agencies. But how about, managing these conflicts within the UN early on, getting the teams in there that are operating along these specific, guidelines from the study, conflict resolution, that kind of thing. And so the study has some suggestions of how to reform the General Assembly. These institutions that we're looking at here, the International Criminal Court, even the UN, how did they come to be? When that was in the period after the 20s and the 30s, and the world had just been traumatized by a world war, families and the millions sent off their young men to not have them come home. There was a mainstream peace unit, peace movement, and they channeled that, to make a UN, to have dispute resolution mechanisms, to have an international criminal court. So then the people who are in this international law sector can come up with the mechanisms of how to strengthen these institutions. This is a very agile solution. Instead of having a UN peacekeeping force, have a civilian peacekeeping force, a non-armed peacekeeping force, having outsiders with the training, with the ethic to come in and to diffuse these situations. And so, there is the whole entire field of international law. We need to use it. Somehow, with the US being in the position of having this military might, and under one certain administration that I'm thinking of specifically, that treaties would come before the administration to be, approved, or to the Senate to be approved, and to all except one were not approved. So we have to comply with existing treaties, and not just say the treaties are for everyone else and not for us, not for the United States. Wherever there is I like to say, some kind of human need, some kind of vacuum in society, an NGOs appear to meet that need. Well, the same thing, we need to create new treaties. We need to have you know, a very, very rigorous reduction in greenhouse gases. And already we're seeing climate refugees, certainly in the lowest lying countries, the coastal areas. And then the model that does come from Truth and from South Africa of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I know that Desmond Tutu has recommended this for Israel and Palestine. Again, this next statement is kind of there's a counterpart to the peace movement. A counterpart is the development community, the international development assistance. So both domestically within economies to have the domestic budget go to meet the basic human needs of the people, have safety nets, and to have for the developing world to have a healthy international development assistance program. Here they say democratize the economic finance institutions. I don't know about democratizing WTO, World Trade Organization. I think we should get rid of it. It is a corporatocracy. It favors unelected committees. It gives privileges and advantages to companies over elected regions. So I'm not in favor of keeping WTO. I do have some experience with IBRD. That refers to the World Bank. So I did work there at administrative assistant level, and what I saw, and I've written on this, that I saw implement many good projects benefiting the poor, urban development, rural development, nutrition, education. So where the IBRD lends $46 billion per year to developing countries, and we in the developed world, we have a tax base. So anytime you need to aggregate those funds and have a common project, have a road, we can raise those funds, but there is no capital in developing countries. So the multilateral development banks, which the World Bank is just one, there's the Asia Development Bank, the African Development Bank, I think an Islamic Development Bank, are the only institutions that are the lenders of the last resort for developing countries. When you think of Africa and how rapidly they have coups, it's a very high risk environment. So the democratizing is really creating the mechanisms of accountability in these organizations. And I just did learn, any money plays, any financial institution that money flows to Africa or India, for example, there's a very high risk of corruption. But there's oversight as well. I mean, all these institutions get replenishments from their donor countries, all the European countries, US and Japan. Well, Senator Lugar on the US side had the committee for this oversight, and he really drove home about the anti-corruption efforts, and the institutions are responsive to this reform, where they created an ombudsman office, an entire vice presidency for transparency or integrity, and it showed bank staff how to report when some illegitimate, some bribery, some corruption was going on in a project, and that the vendor or the consultant, the firm, would then be banned from doing any business in the future. So these in terms of the World Bank, what I saw in the time I was there in the 90s, that individual people within the bank could implement reforms. Going on, so we've got recommendation for this environmentally sustainable global Marshall Plan. And I think the sense of that comes in a graphic that's very dramatic, and it's called the champagne glass graphic. So if you can envision a champagne glass, it's the percentiles of wealth in the world. And so we here in America, Europe, and Japan, and the population of the wealthiest 20%, the wealthiest 20% enjoy 85% of the entire world's income. So all of the rest of the 80% get to share and eke out their livings on 15% of the world's income. So, you know, so anyway, so having this global Marshall Plan. Okay. Yes, another group that I'm with, the Oracle Institute, person affiliated with them, Glenn Martin, has been promoting, and there is an Earth Federation, and so there's almost like a separate dual track to the UN of an Earth Federation meeting globally and at the national level. The role of the NGOs, this I saw firsthand quite a bit in developing countries, that you know, there's a plethora of NGOs trying to work on water, trying to work on education, to work on, my field was small farmers' livelihoods, you know, anti-hunger, to food aid projects. So there's a massive global civil society. A major component of the manual that it lays out here is creating a culture of peace. And telling the new story is very, very persuasive. Is, you know, right now we're at a time where the systems of hierarchy, the systems of corporatocracy, the systems, they're breaking down. And so we have, and this conference is witness to it, people telling the new story. So peace revolution, you know, if you saw the nightly news, you wouldn't, you know, see that, you know, the countries, the progressive movement towards peace, you wouldn't see that. And one thing that World Beyond War has on its website is debunking the myths about war. So just to go through these really quickly, whether it's an environment of law, you have an accretion of law and rules and mores, and we live in it like we're fish swimming in the air and in the water, or birds in the air. So it's impossible to eliminate war. It's been with us since Greek and Roman times or Egyptian times. No, that is, you know, that's cynical, that's deterministic, and we're not. We are creators. We are humans. We have abolished things that were odious in the past. We abolished slavery, feuding, deeply embedded societies. You know, right now in Africa, the practice of female genital mutilation, a group called TOSTEN, is being very effective in going to the communities and getting them to sign documents to stop that. So no, it's not impossible. And along the same lines is it's human nature to do war, and I don't know where this comes from, but that before 6,000 years, it claims that war was sporadic, and it was, some societies have not known war at all. And several nations have not chosen to have a military. So it's a social construct. So it's not in our genes. There's nothing natural about war, which all of us on this Zoom call would agree. And here's the thing, I did have a radio interview with Greta Starr from World Beyond War, and she made this point that to get people to shoot a weapon at another person is highly conditioned. And afterwards, they're traumatized. So we know that our servicemen are coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, and their lives are ruined in some ways. Sometimes they become, it says here chemically dependent, but so having peace doesn't do that. Having peace, doing cooperation, trying to do development projects, that does not create post-traumatic stress disorder. A myth here is we've always had war, and it's a kind of a new phenomenon, kind of not with after the hunter-gatherer times and shifting to agriculture, when you could aggregate grain and store it up, and that's a riches. So think Babylon, Sumerians. So no, it's not the arbiter of our civilization in history. So yeah, war is not inevitable because of crises. We are always capable of constant rational behavior and choice. And the main thing I want to say here is we have to really take on this military-industrial complex, but also the media complex and the congressional complex and the nexus of those three. That you had the airwaves blanketed, during the run-up to the Iraq War, by DOD sponsored, trained, on message propagandists, former so when the DOD wants to do war, they're not supposed to propagandize their own people, and that was revealed by the New York Times and by Amy Goodman. Here's a myth called "We are a sovereign nation," that we can draw a line around ourselves, and that it's not a permeable boundary, and we have borders. But what we know is a missile can cross the border. Ideas, especially right now, we know viruses can cross borders. Refugees and migrants don't, if the border's not patrolled, can come right in. Technology. So no, we're in a permeable boundary where we're influenced by the global community. So the U.S. in this terms of war to defend ourselves, the U.S. is under a type of a myth that we had the oceans on either side, and we've had incursions from the British from time to time, and maybe skirmishes on the southern border, but our safest relationship is with Mexico and Canada. So we're not going to war with them. We're not defending our, maybe the Canadians are defending their border against us right now. So establishing military bases is an offensive practice. It simulates hostility, and it makes us less secure. So a defensive posture would consist of protecting our, coast guard, our border patrol, to our own territorial integrity, and repel an attack. So the magnitude, and I know I'm speaking to the choir here, the magnitude of our military spending is an offensive position. Okay, there are no good wars. There's no good outcomes of wars. They're totally overwhelmingly destructive. They pollute. They cause the deaths of massive numbers of people. They maim, they dislocate. And the birth of these World War I, World War II together created two superpowers, a nuclear, what is it called? MAD, mutual assured destruction. So no, there are no good wars. The Christian church came up with something called a just war doctrine, that you couldn't do more destruction than if you did not go to war, that don't attack civilians and don't do aerial bombardment. That is, you know, mincing, that's splitting hairs. So what we know in empowering our war institutions, our military agencies with the level of resources that they have is, and here I'm going to be quoting Morton Halperin, who is a professor of mine. His seminal book was called Bureaucratic Politics. And when you create a bureaucracy in an agency, it actually, it wants to sustain and maintain itself as if it was a person. It wants to survive, and it sees all, you know, all things that happen in terms of, does this increase our budget? So, so this paying people to sit around and plan for, I think it's called total spectrum domination, or to, you know, they then you get things like they try to drum up threats to, you know, to justify their existence. These war stances, these aggressive stances, no one wins. Not the side who's on the upper side of a war, not the side on the losing side. And who are these winning and losing sides? Well, let's just look at our modern recent history. It's like there's basically slaughter. There's a industrial complex that has people conducting war in Nevada in a room and not knowing the people that they're killing on the other side of the world. So it's just this uneven, you know, and that demoralizes, that dehumanizes both sides. Yeah, this makes the point that I just made, that it's the wealthy nations can afford to wage war, and they can have whatever their rationale of collateral damage, they can slaughter innocents. So we know in the Iraq War that either directly or because of the destruction of the infrastructure of Iraq, 600,000 Iraqis lost their lives. So that's a one-sided slaughter. Okay, I'm sure many people who are reading this, you know, can think of all the reasons why this myth, war is good for the economy, is not true. We do have industries in our country. We do have aerospace industries. We have technology, I don't want to name names, but there are people who benefit from war making, and so the war machine weakens an economy. It's like siphoning off the treasure of the economy. So you really can't argue for deep sixing the country's wealth instead of going for improving the standard of living, increasing our industry and production of manufacturing and of economic goods. So $1 spent on positive social benefit on education, healthcare produces more jobs than spent in the war and defense industries. So I think that is self-evident. So here's where we come to this peace culture. Many people might have been exposed to this Gary Davis. Gary Davis was someone who was a pilot in World War II, who was devastated at the destruction he wrought with his bombing. And he started a campaign called, Citizen of the World Citizen Campaign. So this view at the top that we are planetary citizens, we're one people, we're one planet, we're one piece. There's so many things you can say to that we have the same emotions, we have the same, everything, organ system, the same skeletal structures, the same, aspirations for well-being. So being able to spread and fund this peace education, this peace research, one of our congressmen, I don't know if people remember, Dennis Kucinich, he recommended to have a Department of Peace. To have peace, you have to fund this peace education, this peace research. Peace journalism on Friday, the last day in the series, there will be a peace journalist, and we'll be talking about that. That somehow the media, and it's glorifies war, it uses war terminology. It's almost like a cheerleader for war. And then to also encourage the work of peaceful religious initiatives. So we have our work cut out ahead because we need to educate. We need to educate the decision makers, the opinion makers, and everyone. And we need to do that. Sometimes the nonviolent direct action campaigns, if you just kind of think right now, if you think about the Extension Rebellion, to really get attention to an issue, to do these direct action campaigns. So World Beyond War drafted this statement, based on all the aforementioned, based on all what we've been sharing here, that hundreds and thousands of people have signed on to, and including peace groups and different organizations. I'll just read it out for us. I understand that wars and militarism make us less safe rather than protect us, that they kill, injure, and traumatize adults, children, and infants, severely damage the natural environment, erode civil liberties, and drain our economies, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. I commit to engage in and support non-violent efforts to end all war and preparations for war, and to create a sustainable and just peace. So I think that statement, that pledge, they call it, kind of sums it up. So thousands have signed the pledge. Demilitarization is underway. 20 countries, in addition to Costa Rica, disbanded their militaries. In Europe, if you think of the history of Europe and all the, hundreds of years of wars, now they're the European Union. Many advocates are in favor of nuclear weapons. Leaders in the Senate, the secretaries of state, military officers have rejected nuclear weapons. Let me just mention, I'm originally from Oregon, and one of our senior senators, Senator Mark Hatfield, he was a young man going into the aftermath of one of the nuclear bombings, and that marked him for life, and he was lifelong in his role in the Senate to have moratoriums and to abolish nuclear weapons. And so to kind of celebrate that there is a movement to end fossil fuel use and the carbon economy. Okay, well, we're coming to the top of the hour, so I'm just going to jump down right to the last sentence of this next slide, and it says, "A peace revolution is already underway." Yeah, I just want to make a pitch for using this resource, that, to have a group of people who are the experts in the field, who have brought together so much to create, like, if not what we have now, so many people can do the diagnosis and what's wrong, but to, run with different parts of this positive agenda.
That's fantastic. So where would you say the most, your number one, number two source for people to get involved?
Well, the World Beyond War website is www.worldbeyondwar.org. And I have to say, they have a resource page. They've done 4 international conferences. It's just a rich wealth of resources, but they have a lot that articulates and promotes this particular document called A Global Security System.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laurie. And I'm really looking forward to all of your presentations. So thank you so much, Laurie, for preparing all this. So any of you watching, we will be repackaging this into shorter segments. And also, Laurie is always available to do webinars and to teach. This is her passion. So thank you so much, Laurie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Noelle.
Mm-hmm.